Thank you, Kevin. Any questions from the floor? There are a couple of microphones in the middle aisles here. If anybody asks a question, or if they want to raise their hand, I'm sure somebody can bring a microphone over to you. Any questions? Let me start off with a couple of applied questions, Kevin. How many clubs are doing sort of detailed biomechanic analysis of this nature in AFL? Because I know in soccer, for instance, I don't know of any club, in England anyway, that are doing this kind of technique analysis.
There's a few. I think there's to different levels, I guess. So I think there's one club I'm mainly associated with, but also the university's got a link with another in recruiting subjects. Probably not as a specific and integrated program as such. There might be three clubs that have specific biomechanics or skill acquisition people doing this to probably video level, and then the club that I'm involved with, we do this sort of level work in terms of the high level analysis. I think it's a really important way to go. It would be fantastic if more clubs did it. It just needs the right people to be able to run it and to interpret the data.
Second question linking on from there is that let's discuss a little bit the notion of variability. So I'm intrigued as to, clearly it seems to me the actions you were using were very closed skills. Presumably in the dynamic open game situation, there is a lot more variability in relation to these kicking patterns. Is that the case? And if so, have you looked at that?
Yeah, very much so, particularly associated with approach speed. But certainly, I guess, with this research, it's these specific kicks exist in the games, and they probably it's probably 50% of the kicks would be somewhat open, so in space with time to kick. But there certainly are a lot of different kicks. We're trying a lot of different kicks in, we looked at the different ones in rugby league, also in different situations, how these principles apply or how much they apply to the different situations. But we're certainly finding from a technical change point of view, getting the basic patterning right is very useful for in the first stages to then move on to the other kicks. But yeah, we're looking at those, particularly around impact for different kick types.
I only half caught your comment on fatigue and performance. Your argument was that fatigue influences the kicking pattern?
Yep. So it seems to be a bit of a shift. So once again, we've sort of been a lot is associated between the knee and the hip. And what was happening is under fatigue, the guys, so the knee kickers, the guys who were extending their knee more rapidly, they slowed down around the knee, but they made up for it. They almost maintained the same foot speed, not quite, but close to it, by combining using more hip. So it was a sort of an axial rotation, if you like, so spinning around to the trunk, but also more hip force was generated. So they've shifted it around a little bit under fatigue.
Okay. So your recommendation there was to practice when not fatigued?
No, that was what I was saying. That's current snapshot would be a lot of people do practice without being under fatigue. So when they're fresh early in training, so it needs to be a consideration that needs both, certainly, and potentially certainly more shifting towards the fatigue stage.
Okay, I mean that's a good point, of course, because in the area of motor learning, the research evidence typically suggests that practice when fatigue is detrimental to performance in that particular session, but doesn't have negative impacts on long-term learning, retention and transfer of skill. I guess the argument is that your practice conditions must match the demands of competition, and I think that's quite important.
Yeah, I agree. It's a fascinating area that you're talking about, because there needs to be some sort of balance from an applied practical point of view as well, to not have people under fatigue such that they get injured as well, but still keep the volumes up and have a fair bit of content in that fatigue state.
Thanks, Kevin. Any final questions from the floor? Brian? Brian and then Pekka, and then we'll move on to the next speaker.
Kevin, you made comments there about the patterns perhaps being established at a pretty young age based on your senior and junior research. Given that, in your experience then, both for preferred and non-preferred kicking, if you train intensively at a later age, what sort of improvement is likely in kicking? If you're training, really trying to intensively train when you're 18 onwards.
Still really big. I think a couple of factors go into that one. I'd say there doesn't seem to be an age where they can't, players can't change. I'll just put on the kicking coach's hat for a bit. If they've got buy into it and they want to change, then they'll be able to change. I've had 30-year-old AFL players who've changed substantially, measurably with their technique. Equally, I've had 16-year-olds who won't change at all. I think the rate of change slows down. The other thing that certainly AFL players have is that when they're 16, they've got a body size maybe 70 kilos. When they get to the AFL system, they get up to 80 or 90 kilograms and are much stronger, so they're working with a very different body. So the kicking pattern itself changes, I think, for them subtly during that time. My experience is that the changes are quicker when they're younger, but still I see the same changes at senior level with the intensive training and with that key bit of buy-in for the players. Probably.
Pekka, final question.
Concerning your numbers in the maximal kick, I approximated that the contact time with ball and foot could be some 10 milliseconds. Yeah. Have you done any analysis about the energy conservation or linear momentum conservation?
The momentum, did you say, Essa?
Conservation of energy before and after impact and linear momentum.
No, we've done, we analysed it from an energy point of view, but I hadn't considered the linear momentum idea. I guess I suppose the main reason I stayed away from the momentum equation was because it wasn't a classical impact where it was immediately off, so on and off, and so the MV changed from that.
Yeah. Next question could be that what is your approximation that what is the mass behind the ball? Can you make any approximation of that?
We haven't, but very interested in question was what mass is behind the ball. In biomechanics, we discuss a thing called effective mass, which how much mass is actually applied in that system. So it's not the whole body; it's probably a subset of it. I think Thomas Bull Anderson and potentially Hero as well might have used just the shank and foot. Is that right? Certainly Thomas did. We haven't approximated that. I guess with the punt kicking style, it's a little bit trickier because we have got that linear forwards movement, so the knee isn't stationary, and that was one of the assumptions that Thomas used in his work. So, assuming that, we have mucked around with it, but haven't got a good approximation of it. But it's a really good question. It would be a terrific area that we could explore further.
Okay, thanks so much, Kevin, for a very interesting talk.